Beloved, tonight I want you to pause, breathe, and recognize something powerful. The same God who spoke galaxies into existence is concerned about the thoughts moving through your mind right now. Some of you came here carrying noise, worry, pressure, unanswered questions, restless nights, but I came with a prophetic assignment to declare that peace is about to invade your mind. Because when God releases his peace, confusion must bow, anxiety must break, and the storm inside you must become still. There are battles that happen on the outside, but there are also battles that happen in the unseen realm of the mind. The enemy knows that if he can keep your mind noisy, he can keep your spirit distracted. But tonight we are not whispering weak prayers. We are releasing an atomic prayer, a prayer that penetrates chaos, dismantles anxiety, and aligns your thoughts with the supernatural peace of God. I decree and declare that as this prayer begins, every racing thought will slow down, every heavy burden will lift, and every restless spirit will encounter the calming presence of the Holy Spirit. Peace is not just a feeling, it is a divine force. And when the peace of God shows up, it guards your heart, it protects your mind, and it restores the authority God placed within you. So, before we go deeper into this moment of prayer, I want you to do something powerful. If you believe God is about to quiet your mind and fill your life with his peace, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel for daily prayer that strengthens your spirit every single day. And right now, type Amen in the comments as a declaration of faith. And while you're there, I want you to comment one thing you're believing God for, because when faith is spoken, heaven pays attention. Get ready, because tonight, through this atomic prayer, the noise will stop, the pressure will break, and the peace of God will begin to rule over your mind like never before. Beloved, before we pray tonight, we must understand something profound about the spiritual journey you are walking. There is a battle taking place, and it is not always visible. It does not always happen around you. Often it happens within you. It takes place in the quiet corridors of your thoughts, in the late hours of the night when everything is still, in those moments when your mind begins to replay worries, fears, and questions that seem to have no answers. The battlefield of the believer is often the mind. Many people think their greatest struggles are the situations around them, the financial pressures, the relationship tensions, the uncertainty about the future. But what truly determines victory or defeat is what happens inside your mind. Because when the mind becomes overwhelmed with noise, the heart becomes heavy, and the spirit begins to feel distant from the peace that God has promised. Yet God never designed your mind to be a place of chaos. Your mind was created to be a sanctuary where his presence brings clarity, stability, and rest. The enemy understands something about the mind that many believers overlook. He knows that if he can influence your thoughts, he can influence your emotions. And if he can influence your emotions, he can influence your decisions. That is why so many battles begin with a whisper of doubt, a subtle thought of fear, or a quiet suggestion that something will not work out. These thoughts often appear small at first, but when they are repeated again and again, they begin to grow louder until they feel like truth. Some of you listening right now know exactly what this feels like. You may smile during the day. You may continue with your responsibilities. But inside your mind, there is a constant movement of thoughts that refuse to rest. Questions about tomorrow, concerns about situations that are not yet resolved, memories of past disappointments. Sometimes the mind becomes so crowded with these thoughts that peace feels distant, like something you once experienced but cannot seem to hold on to anymore. But the Word of God reminds us that the mind is not meant to be controlled by fear or confusion. Scripture tells us that God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, of love, and of a sound mind. That phrase, sound mind, carries a powerful meaning. It describes a mind that is disciplined, stable, and protected from the chaos of worry. A mind that is anchored in truth rather than shaken by every troubling thought that passes through it. Yet the battle for the mind is very real. Every day, countless thoughts pass through your mind. Some of them bring encouragement, hope, and faith, but others attempt to plant seeds of doubt. They whisper questions like, what if things go wrong? Or what if you are not strong enough? Or what if the situation never changes? These thoughts often arrive quietly, but when they are not challenged, they begin to shape how we see ourselves, how we see our circumstances, and even how we perceive God's presence in our lives. One of the most important truths you must recognize tonight is that not every thought that enters your mind deserves to stay there. Just because a thought appears does not mean it belongs to you. Thoughts are like visitors passing through the doorway of your mind. Some visitors bring wisdom and peace, while others attempt to bring fear and confusion. The key to winning the battle for your mind is learning how to recognize which thoughts come from God and which ones attempt to distract you from His truth. The enemy often works through repetition. He repeats the same worries again and again until they begin to feel familiar. Familiar thoughts can easily become accepted thoughts, and accepted thoughts can begin to shape beliefs. But when you begin to recognize that this is a strategy, you can interrupt the cycle. You can remind yourself that fear is not your inheritance, anxiety is not your destiny, confusion is not your portion. God's peace operates very differently from the noise that fear creates. Fear is loud, urgent, and demanding. It pushes the mind to run ahead into imagined problems that may never happen. Peace, on the other hand, is steady and gentle. It does not rush the heart. It quiets the spirit. It reminds you that the same God who has carried you through every season of your life is still present right now, still guiding your steps, still watching over you with perfect awareness. Many people try to silence their thoughts by distraction. They fill their days with activity, noise, and constant movement. But distraction does not bring true peace. It only delays the moment when the mind becomes quiet enough to reveal what has been hiding beneath the surface. True peace does not come from escaping your thoughts. It comes from inviting God into the place where those thoughts exist. When God's presence enters the mind, something powerful begins to happen. The noise begins to fade. The tension begins to loosen. The heart begins to remember that it was never meant to carry every burden alone. God's peace has the ability to calm the inner storms that no one else can see. It is the kind of peace that does not depend on circumstances being perfect. It is a peace that remains even when questions are still unanswered. There are moments in life when the mind feels like a crowded room where every voice is speaking at the same time. One voice says you should worry. Another voice says you should be afraid. Another voice reminds you of past mistakes. But there is also another voice, the voice of God's Spirit. That voice does not shout. It does not create panic. It speaks with quiet authority, reminding you of promises that cannot be shaken. Learning to listen for that voice is part of winning the battle for your mind. The more you allow God's truth to shape your thinking, the less power fear will have over you. Faith begins to grow where fear once lived. Confidence begins to rise where uncertainty once dominated. Slowly, the mind begins to experience the calm that comes from trusting that God's plan is still unfolding, even when you cannot see every detail. This transformation does not always happen instantly. The mind has patterns that develop over time. If you have spent years worrying, the mind may have learned to return to those patterns automatically. But every time you choose faith instead of fear, you begin to reshape those patterns. Every time you choose to focus on God's promises rather than your anxieties, you strengthen the pathway of peace within your mind. It is important to understand that God does not condemn you for struggling with anxious thoughts. He understands the pressures you face. He sees the responsibilities you carry. He knows the concerns that weigh on your heart. But He also invites you to release those burdens into His hands. The invitation of God is not one of judgment, but of rest. When you begin to surrender your thoughts to God, something remarkable takes place. The same mind that once felt overwhelmed begins to experience clarity. The same heart that once felt restless begins to feel steady again. The storms that once seemed impossible to calm begin to lose their intensity as God's presence fills the spaces where worry once lived. Peace does not mean that every challenge disappears overnight. Life will still bring moments that test your patience and stretch your faith. But when your mind is anchored in God's peace, those challenges no longer control your inner world. You can face uncertainty without being consumed by it. You can walk through difficult seasons without losing the quiet confidence that God is still guiding your path. The battle for your mind is ultimately a battle for your focus. Whatever you focus on begins to grow stronger in your awareness. If your focus remains on problems, those problems begin to feel larger and more overwhelming. But when your focus shifts toward God's faithfulness, His promises, and His constant presence, your perspective begins to change. Suddenly, the problems that once seemed enormous begin to look smaller in comparison to the greatness of the God who stands beside you. The worries that once filled your mind begin to lose their urgency. The fears that once felt powerful begin to fade as your trust in God becomes stronger. Your mind is one of the most powerful gifts God has given you. It is the place where imagination, faith, creativity, and understanding come together. When your mind is aligned with God's truth, it becomes a place of wisdom and peace. When it is overwhelmed by fear, it becomes a place of confusion and exhaustion. That is why guarding your mind is such an important spiritual practice. What you listen to, what you focus on, and what you repeatedly think about all shape the environment of your mind. When you fill your thoughts with God's promises, your mind begins to reflect the peace that those promises carry. Peace is not something that must be chased endlessly. It is something that God freely offers to those who invite His presence into their thoughts. When His peace enters your mind, it begins to guard your heart like a protective shield, preventing fear from taking control. And tonight, as we prepare to pray, remember that this battle for your mind is not one you are meant to fight alone. God's Spirit is present, ready to strengthen you, ready to quiet every storm of anxiety, ready to remind you that your mind can become a place of rest rather than a place of struggle. Because when God's peace begins to rule your mind, the noise of fear loses its authority, the whispers of doubt lose their influence, and the restless thoughts that once dominated your inner world begin to fall silent in the presence of a peace that is deeper than understanding, stronger than worry, and gentler than every anxious thought that once tried to take hold of your mind. Beloved, one of the first steps toward experiencing the deep peace of God is learning to recognize the noise that tries to occupy your mind. Noise does not always sound like chaos on the outside. Sometimes the loudest noise is completely silent to everyone around you, yet it echoes constantly inside your thoughts. It appears as worry that refuses to rest, as fears that replay themselves again and again, as questions that seem to multiply the more you try to quiet them. This is the subtle noise of anxiety and fear, and many people carry it without even realizing how deeply it has settled into their thinking. Anxiety often begins quietly. It may start as a small concern about a situation you care about. Perhaps it is a responsibility you feel unprepared for, a decision that seems uncertain, or a future that appears unclear. At first, the thought seems harmless, even logical. After all, it feels natural to think about the things that matter to us. But anxiety has a way of slowly expanding. A single thought can begin to grow until it occupies more and more space in the mind. You might notice that one concern leads to another. Your mind begins to move ahead into scenarios that have not even happened yet. It imagines problems that may never appear. It asks endless what-if questions. What if things do not work out? What if something goes wrong? What if the situation becomes worse? The mind begins to create entire stories about the future, and each one adds another layer of tension to the heart. Fear operates in a similar way. It often disguises itself as caution or preparation, but underneath it carries a deeper message that tries to weaken your confidence. Fear whispers that you may not be capable, that the challenges ahead are too great, that the obstacles in your life are stronger than the strength God has placed within you. When these whispers repeat often enough, they begin to shape how you see yourself and how you see the circumstances around you. Many people assume that anxiety and fear will disappear if they simply ignore them. But ignoring these thoughts does not remove them. In fact, when they are left unexamined, they often grow stronger because they remain unchallenged. The mind continues to replay them quietly in the background, even when you try to focus on other things. Over time, the noise becomes so familiar that it starts to feel normal. You may wake up in the morning already feeling a sense of pressure in your thoughts. Before the day has even begun, your mind is already racing ahead through a list of worries. Perhaps you think about responsibilities waiting for you, conversations you are nervous about, or problems that still have no clear solution. The body may feel tired, but the mind refuses to slow down. This constant mental activity can slowly drain your sense of peace. It can make simple moments feel heavy because the mind is always carrying something unresolved. Even when you try to rest, the thoughts continue moving, repeating the same concerns in different ways. It is like a room filled with many voices speaking at once, each one trying to capture your attention. But recognizing this noise is the first step toward reclaiming your peace. When you become aware of the patterns of anxiety and fear, you begin to see them for what they are, thoughts that attempt to occupy your mind without permission. Just because they appear does not mean they deserve your agreement. Your mind was never meant to be controlled by every anxious thought that passes through it. The enemy often uses fear because fear shifts your focus away from God's faithfulness. Instead of remembering how God has guided you through past challenges, fear encourages you to imagine a future where you must face everything alone. It paints pictures of difficulty while ignoring the countless ways God has already shown his presence in your life. But the truth is that God's peace has always been stronger than the noise of fear. Scripture reminds us that perfect love drives out fear. This means that when you begin to focus on the love and faithfulness of God, the foundation that fear tries to build begins to crumble. Fear cannot remain where trust in God begins to grow. Sometimes anxiety appears because the mind is trying to control things that were never meant to be controlled by human effort. The future, for example, is something we often try to predict or manage in our thoughts. We analyze possibilities, consider every outcome, and attempt to prepare for every scenario, yet no amount of mental effort can fully control what tomorrow will bring. God never asked you to carry the responsibility of controlling every detail of your future. Instead, he invites you to trust that he is already present in the days ahead. When you release the need to manage every possibility in your mind, you create space for peace to enter. Another form of mental noise comes from memories of past experiences. Sometimes the mind returns to moments that were painful or disappointing. It replays conversations, decisions, or events that cannot be changed. These memories can quietly influence how you see yourself, causing you to doubt your ability to move forward with confidence. But the past does not have the authority to define your present peace. God's grace is powerful enough to redeem every chapter of your life. Even the moments that felt like failures can become places where God's wisdom and strength begin to grow within you. Recognizing the noise of anxiety and fear also means learning to observe your thoughts without immediately believing them. When a worrying thought appears, you can pause and ask yourself whether that thought aligns with the truth of God's promises. Does it reflect the peace that God offers, or does it attempt to pull your mind into confusion? This simple awareness begins to shift the power dynamic within your mind. Instead of being carried along by every anxious thought, you become someone who observes those thoughts with wisdom. You begin to see which ones deserve attention and which ones can simply pass by without taking root. The mind is incredibly powerful, but it is also incredibly responsive to what you consistently focus on. If your attention remains fixed on problems, those problems will appear larger in your perception. But when you begin to focus on God's presence and his promises, the atmosphere of your mind begins to change. Slowly, the constant tension created by anxious thinking begins to loosen. The thoughts that once felt overwhelming start to lose their urgency. Your mind begins to rediscover a rhythm of calm that may have been hidden beneath layers of worry. It is important to remember that experiencing anxious thoughts does not mean your faith is weak. Many faithful people throughout history have faced moments where their minds were filled with questions or concerns. Faith is not the absence of challenging thoughts. Faith is the choice to return your focus to God even when those thoughts appear. God understands the complexity of the human mind. He knows that your thoughts can move quickly, that your emotions can be influenced by circumstances, and that the pressures of life can sometimes feel overwhelming. Yet his invitation remains gentle and constant. He invites you to bring every concern to him rather than carrying it alone. Prayer becomes a powerful way to release the noise that anxiety creates. When you speak your concerns to God, you move them out of the closed loop of your thoughts and into a relationship where they can be met with divine peace. The act of prayer reminds your mind that you are not alone with your worries. Peace often begins with small moments of stillness. When you pause, breathe, and remember that God is near, the intensity of anxious thinking begins to soften. Your body begins to relax. Your thoughts begin to slow. The storm that once felt overwhelming begins to settle. The more you practice this awareness, the easier it becomes to recognize when fear is trying to enter your thinking. Instead of being surprised by anxious thoughts, you become prepared to respond with truth. You remind yourself that God is still in control, that his guidance is still present, and that his peace is still available to you. Over time, the mind begins to develop new patterns. Where it once rushed toward worry, it begins to move toward trust. Where it once replayed fearful scenarios, it begins to remember God's promises. The noise of anxiety gradually becomes quieter as the voice of peace becomes clearer. God's peace does not erase your ability to think carefully about life's responsibilities. Instead, it transforms the way you approach them. You can still plan, consider possibilities, and make thoughtful decisions, but your mind is no longer driven by fear. Instead, it is guided by wisdom and calm confidence. There is a gentle strength that emerges when the mind is no longer dominated by anxious noise. You begin to feel more present in the moments of your life. Simple experiences become more meaningful because your thoughts are not constantly pulled away by worry. Your heart begins to experience a deeper sense of gratitude and trust. The peace of God is not distant or difficult to reach. It is closer than you realize, waiting for the moment when you begin to release the fears that have been filling your mind. Each time you recognize the noise of anxiety and choose to surrender it to God, you create more space for His peace to settle within you. And as that peace begins to grow, the mind that once felt crowded with worry starts to become quiet again, like calm waters after a storm, where the reflections of God's promises begin to appear clearly in the stillness of your thoughts, where the heart begins to breathe more freely, and where the presence of God gently replaces every whisper of fear that once tried to fill the silence of your mind. Beloved, there are moments in life when ordinary prayers feel too small for the battles we are facing in our minds. There are seasons when the thoughts pressing against your peace seem persistent, when worries try to repeat themselves, when fear attempts to sit quietly in the background of your thinking. In those moments, God invites us to pray with a deeper level of authority, with a clarity that reminds our spirit that prayer is not simply words spoken into the air. Prayer is a powerful spiritual force that moves through the unseen realm and begins to reshape the atmosphere of our lives. When we talk about atomic prayer, we are describing prayer that carries concentrated spiritual power, just as an atom holds extraordinary energy within something that appears small. A focused prayer carries extraordinary authority within words that may seem simple. When a believer prays with faith, with alignment to God's promises, and with a heart that trusts His presence, that prayer releases spiritual energy that begins to transform situations both within and around them. Many people have learned to pray quietly, almost cautiously, as if they are unsure whether their words truly matter. But God never designed prayer to be weak or uncertain. Prayer is one of the greatest privileges given to humanity, a direct connection between the human heart and the heart of God. When you pray, you are not speaking into emptiness. You are entering a conversation with the Creator who understands every detail of your life. Atomic prayer is focused. It is intentional. It does not wander through endless words without direction. Instead, it moves with clarity and purpose, declaring God's truth over the areas where confusion once existed. When you pray this way, your words begin to carry authority because they are aligned with the promises that God has already spoken. The authority of prayer does not come from human strength or impressive language. It comes from the relationship you have with God. The moment you choose to trust Him, the moment you invite His presence into your thoughts and your circumstances, your prayer begins to carry the authority of that relationship. It becomes a declaration that you believe God is present, active, and able to move in ways beyond what you can see. Sometimes people underestimate the power of their prayers because they feel ordinary. They think their voice is too small or their faith too simple. But God has always chosen to work through the sincere prayers of ordinary people. Throughout history, simple prayers spoken with genuine faith have opened doors that seemed impossible to unlock. Atomic prayer does not depend on how long you pray. It depends on the focus and faith within your heart. A single sentence spoken with deep trust in God can carry more spiritual power than many words spoken without belief. When your heart is aligned with God's will, your prayer becomes like a key that unlocks the peace He has already prepared for you. One of the most powerful aspects of atomic prayer is its ability to shift the atmosphere of your mind. When anxiety tries to fill your thoughts, prayer interrupts that cycle. It redirects your attention away from the endless repetition of worry and toward the steady presence of God. Your mind begins to move from confusion into clarity, from tension into calm. Think about the moments when your mind feels overwhelmed with noise. Thoughts rush past each other quickly, and it becomes difficult to focus on anything peaceful. In those moments, atomic prayer acts like a sudden stillness that enters the storm. It slows the movement of anxious thinking and reminds your spirit that God's authority is greater than any fear attempting to take hold of your mind. Prayer also reminds your heart that you are not alone in your struggles. Sometimes anxiety grows stronger when we feel isolated with our thoughts, as if no one else understands what we are experiencing. But the moment you begin to pray, You reconnect with the truth that God sees you fully and cares deeply about what is happening within you. The authority of atomic prayer also comes from the words you choose to declare. When you speak God's promises during prayer, you align your thinking with divine truth. Instead of repeating worries in your mind, you begin repeating the promises of peace, guidance, and strength that God has already given. For example, when fear whispers that you are not capable, prayer reminds you that God has given you strength. When anxiety suggests that the future is uncertain, prayer reminds you that God is already present in the days ahead. When your thoughts feel restless, prayer invites the peace of God to settle within your mind like a gentle calm that replaces the tension. Atomic prayer also involves intention. It means approaching prayer with the awareness that your words carry spiritual significance. Instead of speaking casually or distractedly, you speak with focus. You allow your heart to become quiet enough to recognize the presence of God, and from that place of awareness, your prayer begins to flow. Sometimes this kind of prayer may be spoken softly. Sometimes it may be whispered in a moment of stillness. Other times it may be spoken with bold confidence as you declare God's promises over your life. What matters is the sincerity of your heart and your willingness to trust that God hears every word. Another powerful aspect of atomic prayer is the way it reshapes your inner perspective. When you spend time declaring God's peace, your mind begins to accept that peace as truth. Slowly, the patterns of fear begin to weaken. The thoughts that once repeated worry begin to lose their influence as your focus shifts toward faith. Your mind becomes like a garden where different seeds can grow. If the seeds of fear are planted repeatedly, they begin to produce worry and tension. But when the seeds of prayer are planted consistently, they begin to produce peace, confidence, and clarity. Atomic prayer is one of the ways we intentionally plant those seeds of faith within our thinking. God never intended for prayer to feel distant or complicated. He desires honest communication with your heart. Atomic prayer simply means approaching that communication with awareness and intention, recognizing that your words have the power to invite God's peace directly into your thoughts. There is also something deeply calming about knowing that prayer connects you to a power far greater than your own understanding. When your mind begins to remember that God is guiding your life, the pressure to control everything begins to fade. You realize that you do not have to solve every problem alone because divine wisdom is available to guide you. Prayer becomes a moment where you release the tension you have been carrying. It becomes a place where your thoughts can slow down and your heart can breathe again. In the quiet rhythm of prayer, the mind begins to remember that peace is not something you must create by your own effort. Peace is something God lovingly provides. Now let me ask you something important, something I want you to truly reflect on. When your mind becomes overwhelmed with worry or fear, what is the first thought that usually enters your mind? Is it a thought of trust or is it a thought of anxiety? Be honest with yourself for a moment. And I want you to share your answer in the comments because recognizing this pattern is the first step toward transforming it. Your response matters because when you become aware of the thoughts that appear first, you begin to understand where your mind naturally goes during moments of pressure. And once you recognize that pattern, you can begin replacing it with prayer that redirects your focus back toward God's peace. Atomic prayer helps you interrupt the automatic patterns of worry. Instead of allowing anxious thoughts to repeat endlessly, you pause and speak words of faith. Even a simple prayer such as, God, I trust you with this moment, can begin to shift the atmosphere of your thinking. The authority within that prayer does not come from perfection. It comes from sincerity. God responds to hearts that reach for Him honestly, even when those hearts feel tired or uncertain. Every prayer spoken in faith becomes part of the transformation happening within your mind. As you practice atomic prayer regularly, you may begin to notice that your thoughts become calmer more quickly. Situations that once caused immediate anxiety may begin to feel more manageable because your mind has learned to respond with prayer rather than panic. Peace begins to arrive sooner, and it begins to stay longer. This transformation does not require extraordinary effort. It simply requires consistency. Each time you choose prayer instead of worry, you strengthen the connection between your mind and God's peace. Over time, this connection becomes more natural, like a pathway that your thoughts know how to follow. The authority of atomic prayer is not limited to specific moments of crisis. It can be practiced throughout your day in quiet ways. A brief prayer while you walk, A whispered request for peace during a busy moment, a gentle declaration of trust when your thoughts begin to feel heavy. Each of these moments becomes an opportunity to invite God's presence into your thinking. Each prayer becomes a reminder that your mind does not have to carry every burden alone. And as these moments of prayer accumulate, the atmosphere of your inner world begins to change. The mind that once felt crowded with anxious noise begins to experience increasing stillness. The heart that once felt restless begins to sense a deeper calm. Prayer becomes less of an emergency response and more of a steady rhythm that keeps your thoughts aligned with the peace of God that quietly settles into every space where faith is spoken and every whisper of prayer invites heaven's calm into the silence of your mind. Beloved, there is a beautiful truth that many people overlook when they search for peace. God's peace is not something distant that must be chased across mountains of effort. It is not hidden behind complicated rituals or reserved only for certain moments of life. The peace of God is a living presence, and it becomes real in your life the moment you begin to invite it intentionally into your mind and your heart. Many people desire peace, yet they rarely pause long enough to truly welcome it. Life moves quickly, responsibilities fill the day, notifications, conversations, expectations, and worries all compete for space within your attention. Without realizing it, the mind becomes crowded with activity, leaving very little room for stillness. And in that crowded space, peace struggles to be noticed. But God's peace does not arrive through noise or pressure. It enters quietly, gently, like a calm breeze moving through an open window. The key word here is open. Your heart must become open to receive what God is already offering. When you intentionally invite His peace, you begin to create that openness within your thoughts. Inviting God's supernatural peace begins with a simple but powerful recognition. You do not have to carry everything alone. Many people develop the habit of trying to manage every problem, solve every uncertainty, and control every outcome in their lives. This constant effort can create a silent pressure within the mind. Even when things appear calm on the outside, the inner world may feel tense, because the mind is constantly working to keep everything together. Yet God never asked you to carry that level of responsibility by yourself. He invites you into a partnership where His wisdom, strength, and peace become part of your journey. When you invite His peace, you are acknowledging that divine help is available and that your life does not depend solely on your own understanding. The act of invitation is deeply powerful. Think about what happens when you invite someone into your home. You make space for them. You welcome their presence. You allow them to enter an environment that was once private. In the same way, inviting God's peace means making space within your thoughts for His presence to dwell. Sometimes this begins with a moment of stillness. You pause the constant movement of your thoughts and simply acknowledge that God is near. You breathe slowly, allowing your body to relax. You remind your heart that you are safe in God's care. These small moments of awareness create openings where peace can begin to settle. Supernatural peace is different from the temporary calm that the world offers. Temporary calm depends on circumstances. It appears when everything seems to be going well and disappears when challenges arise. But the peace that comes from God is steady and enduring. It remains present even when life is uncertain because it is rooted in trust rather than circumstances. When you invite this peace into your mind, something remarkable begins to happen. The frantic movement of anxious thoughts begins to slow down. The inner tension that once felt constant begins to loosen. Your mind starts to recognize that it does not have to solve every problem immediately. There is space to breathe, to reflect, and to trust that God is guiding the path ahead. This invitation also changes how you respond to challenges. Instead of reacting quickly with worry, your mind begins to pause. In that pause, peace enters before fear has a chance to take control. You begin to respond with calm wisdom rather than anxious urgency. Inviting God's peace often involves shifting your attention toward His promises. The mind naturally focuses on whatever it sees most often. If it constantly focuses on problems, those problems begin to feel overwhelming. But when your attention moves toward the truth that God is present and faithful, your perspective begins to change. You start remembering the ways God has guided you in the past, the moments when solutions appeared unexpectedly, the times when strength arrived just when you thought you had none left. These memories become reminders that God's care has been present all along. The more you remember his faithfulness, the easier it becomes to invite his peace into the present moment. Your heart begins to trust that the same God who helped you yesterday is still active today. This trust opens the door wider for peace to enter. Another important part of inviting God's peace is releasing the need to control every detail of the future. The human mind often tries to predict what lies ahead. It imagines possibilities, calculates outcomes, and prepares for every scenario. While thoughtful planning can be helpful, constant prediction can lead to anxiety. God's peace arrives when you allow the future to remain in his hands. Instead of trying to solve tomorrow's problems today, you focus on the grace available in the present moment. This shift in focus removes a heavy burden from your mind and replaces it with a quiet confidence that God is already present in the days ahead. Inviting peace also means allowing yourself to experience God's presence without rushing through it. Sometimes people approach prayer quickly, speaking words but not truly pausing to feel the calm that follows. But when you slow down and remain in that moment of connection with God, you begin to notice the subtle ways his peace settles into your thoughts. It may feel like a gentle quietness spreading through your mind. It may feel like tension leaving your body. It may feel like a steady reassurance that everything will unfold according to God's perfect wisdom. These moments may seem small, but they carry a profound impact on your inner world. Supernatural peace does not erase your responsibilities or challenges. Life will still require decisions, effort, and patience. But peace changes the atmosphere in which those responsibilities exist. Instead of approaching life with constant pressure, you begin to move through it with calm confidence. Your mind becomes clearer because it is not overwhelmed by fear. Your heart becomes lighter because it is not weighed down by endless worry. Even difficult moments become easier to face because you know that God's presence is walking with you through each step. Inviting God's peace also transforms how you interact with the people around you. When your mind is calm, your words become gentler. Your responses become more thoughtful. You carry an atmosphere of steadiness that others can feel. Peace becomes something that not only blesses your life, but also influences the environment around you. There is something deeply powerful about a person who carries the peace of God within them. In a world that often feels rushed and anxious, that peace becomes a quiet testimony of trust in God's faithfulness. People may not always understand where that calm comes from, but they can sense that it is real. This is why inviting God's peace is not only important for your personal well-being, but also for the impact your life can have on others. When your mind is anchored in peace, your presence becomes a source of comfort to those who feel overwhelmed. Now let me ask you something important, something I truly want you to reflect on honestly. When was the last time you intentionally paused and invited God's peace into your mind, not just through quick words, but through a moment of genuine stillness? Was it today, recently, or has it been a long time since you allowed yourself to experience that kind of quiet connection with God? Take a moment to think about that question, and I want you to answer it in the comments. Your answer matters because awareness is the first step toward transformation. When you recognize how often you invite God's peace into your life, you begin to understand how much space you are giving it to grow. And while you are in the comments, you might also reflect on another question. What is one situation in your life right now where you need God's peace the most? Perhaps it is something related to your future, your family, your work, or a decision that feels uncertain. Naming that situation is not a sign of weakness. It is an act of honesty that allows God's peace to enter exactly where it is needed. When you share that in the comments, you are also reminding yourself that God sees every detail of your life. Nothing is hidden from his understanding. Every concern that weighs on your heart is known to him, and his peace is ready to meet you right in that place. The more you practice inviting God's peace, the more natural it becomes. Your mind begins to recognize the feeling of calm that his presence brings. Instead of staying trapped in cycles of worry, your thoughts begin to move towards stillness more easily. Peace becomes like a gentle rhythm within your life. It guides how you think, how you respond, and how you move through each day. Even when challenges appear, that rhythm remains steady, reminding your heart that God's presence is closer than every anxious thought and that his supernatural peace is quietly filling every space where you choose to welcome him into the stillness of your mind. Beloved, one of the most important spiritual disciplines a person can learn is the ability to silence negative thoughts. Thoughts are powerful. They shape how we see the world. how we interpret situations and how we understand ourselves. A single thought may appear small and harmless, yet when repeated again and again, it begins to influence emotions, decisions, and even the direction of a person's life. This is why the battle for peace in your mind often begins with the thoughts you allow to remain there. Negative thoughts often arrive quietly. They do not announce themselves as harmful. Instead, they appear in subtle ways, blending into your thinking so naturally that you may not immediately notice them. A thought might suggest that you are not capable enough to handle a situation. Another may whisper that something good will eventually go wrong. Another might remind you of past mistakes and quietly suggest that those moments define who you are. At first, these thoughts seem like passing observations, but when they are allowed to stay and repeat themselves, they begin to create a pattern within the mind. Over time, the mind becomes familiar with these patterns, and what was once a passing thought can slowly become an internal belief. This is why silencing negative thoughts is not about pretending they never appear. Every person experiences challenging thoughts at times. The goal is not to eliminate every thought immediately, because thoughts naturally move through the mind. The goal is to recognize which thoughts deserve your attention and which ones must be gently dismissed before they take root. Think of your mind as a quiet room with a doorway. Many thoughts walk through that doorway every day. Some bring encouragement, wisdom, and clarity. Others bring fear, doubt, and criticism. You have the ability to decide which thoughts are allowed to remain inside the room. Negative thoughts may knock at the door, but they do not have to stay. One of the reasons negative thoughts become so powerful is because they often repeat themselves. Repetition gives a thought the appearance of truth. If a thought appears once, it may seem insignificant, but if it appears again and again, the mind begins to assume that it must be important. Yet repetition alone does not determine truth. The truth that matters most is the truth found in God's promises. God's voice speaks peace, guidance, and hope. Negative thoughts speak fear, confusion, and discouragement. Learning to recognize the difference between these voices is a key part of protecting your peace. Sometimes negative thoughts arise during moments of stress or uncertainty. When life feels unpredictable, the mind tries to prepare for every possibility. It searches for potential problems so that it can avoid them. While this instinct is meant to protect you, it can also create a constant stream of anxious thinking. Your mind begins to imagine outcomes that have not happened. It plays scenarios over and over, analyzing what could go wrong. Slowly, the mind becomes filled with possibilities that exist only in imagination. These imagined problems can feel just as heavy as real ones, and they often steal the calm that God desires for your heart. Silencing these thoughts begins with awareness. When a negative thought appears, pause and observe it. Notice the message it is trying to deliver. Ask yourself whether that message aligns with the truth of God's promises or whether it attempts to pull your focus toward fear. For example, if a thought suggests that you are alone in your struggles, remember that God promises to be present with you always. If a thought suggests that your future is uncertain and hopeless, remember that God's plans for you are filled with purpose and hope. When you replace negative messages with divine truth, the power of those negative thoughts begins to weaken. Another important step in silencing negative thoughts is learning to slow the pace of your thinking. When the mind moves quickly, it becomes difficult to examine each thought carefully. Thoughts rush past one another, and before you know it, a negative idea has already taken root. But when you slow your breathing and allow your mind to pause, you create space between thoughts. In that space, you gain the ability to choose which thoughts deserve your attention. This pause is where God's peace begins to enter, gently replacing the noise that negative thinking creates. Prayer is one of the most powerful ways to silence negative thoughts. When you speak your concerns to God, you remove them from the endless cycle of internal repetition. Instead of allowing those thoughts to circle endlessly in your mind, you place them into God's hands where they can be met with wisdom and peace. There is something deeply calming about speaking honestly with God. You do not need perfect words. You simply bring your thoughts to Him as they are. In that moment of honesty, the weight those thoughts carried begins to lift because you are no longer holding them alone. Silencing negative thoughts also involves choosing what you focus on throughout your day. The mind naturally absorbs what it repeatedly sees and hears. If your attention constantly moves towards stressful information, criticism, or negativity, your thoughts may begin to mirror that environment. But when you intentionally focus on messages that encourage faith, gratitude, and hope, your mind begins to reflect those qualities instead. The atmosphere of your thoughts slowly shifts from tension toward calm confidence. Gratitude is a particularly powerful tool for quieting negative thoughts. When you take time to notice the blessings already present in your life, your mind begins to recognize that goodness exists alongside challenges. Gratitude reminds your heart that God's care is visible in many small ways throughout your day. Negative thoughts often try to convince you that your life is defined by problems. Gratitude gently corrects that perspective by revealing the many ways God's grace continues to appear. This shift in focus weakens the influence of negativity and strengthens the presence of peace. It is also important to be patient with yourself as you practice this discipline. Silencing negative thoughts is not a skill that develops instantly. The mind has patterns that form over time, and changing those patterns requires consistent attention. There may be days when negative thoughts seem persistent. On those days, remember that progress is not measured by perfection, but by persistence. Each time you recognize a negative thought and choose to release it, you are strengthening your ability to maintain peace. Over time, the mind becomes more skilled at recognizing these thoughts quickly. Instead of lingering for hours or days, they pass through your awareness more easily. Your mind begins to return to calm more quickly because it has learned how to release what does not belong there. God's peace plays a crucial role in this process. Peace is not simply the absence of negative thoughts. It is a presence that actively protects your mind. When you invite God's peace into your thinking, it becomes like a quiet guardian standing at the doorway of your thoughts. Negative ideas may still appear, but they no longer dominate your attention. Peace gently reminds you that those thoughts do not define your identity, your future, or your relationship with God. They are simply passing visitors that can leave as easily as they arrived. As peace grows stronger within you, your mind begins to experience greater clarity. Decisions become easier because your thoughts are not clouded by fear. Your emotions become steadier because your focus is anchored in trust rather than worry. You may begin to notice that situations which once caused intense anxiety now feel more manageable. This does not mean challenges have disappeared. It means your mind has learned to approach them from a place of calm strength rather than reactive fear. The more you practice silencing negative thoughts, the more your inner world begins to resemble the peace that God desires for you. Your mind becomes a place where faith grows more easily, where gratitude appears more often, and where hope remains present even during uncertain seasons. This transformation is not only beneficial for your personal well-being, but also for the way you influence others. When your thoughts are peaceful, your words carry calm encouragement. When your mind is steady, your presence becomes reassuring to those around you. People who are struggling with their own worries may notice the calm within you and feel comforted simply by being near that atmosphere. In this way, the peace growing in your mind becomes something that quietly blesses others as well. God created your mind to be a place of wisdom, creativity, and reflection. It was never meant to be overwhelmed by constant negativity. When you choose to silence thoughts that do not align with His truth, you are restoring your mind to the purpose it was designed for. Each moment you choose peace over negativity becomes a small step toward greater freedom within your thoughts. Each prayer, each pause, each reminder of God's promises strengthens the calm foundation forming within your mind. And slowly, gently, the space that was once filled with restless thinking becomes quieter, clearer, and steadier. As every negative thought that once tried to take root loses its influence in the presence of a mind learning to rest in the calm and protective peace of God that settles softly over every thought you choose to release and every moment you choose to trust Him instead of fear. Beloved, the human mind is constantly searching for direction. Every day your thoughts are forming conclusions about who you are, about what your future looks like, and about how the circumstances of your life will unfold. Whether we realize it or not, the mind is always aligning itself with something. It may align with fear, with past experiences, with the opinions of others, or with the quiet but powerful promises that God has spoken. Aligning your mind with God's promises is one of the most transformative steps you can take toward living in lasting peace. Many people allow their thoughts to be shaped by whatever situation they are currently facing. When circumstances appear difficult, the mind begins to interpret the future through that difficulty. If a season feels uncertain, the mind may begin to imagine that uncertainty will continue indefinitely. Over time, This pattern can cause a person to expect problems rather than hope for possibilities. But God's promises invite your mind to operate differently. Instead of allowing circumstances to define your thinking, His promises encourage you to see your life through the lens of faith. This does not mean ignoring reality or pretending that challenges do not exist. It means recognizing that God's presence and purpose are greater than any challenge that may appear in your life. Aligning your mind with God's promises begins with understanding that His words carry authority. When God speaks, His words are not temporary ideas or hopeful suggestions. They are declarations of truth that carry the power to shape reality. When you allow those words to influence your thinking, your mind begins to move in harmony with a truth that is stronger than doubt and more stable than fear. Consider how often the mind repeats the things it hears most frequently. If someone hears discouraging words repeatedly, those words may begin to echo in their thoughts, even when no one else is speaking them. The same principle works in the opposite direction. When you repeatedly reflect on God's promises, those promises begin to echo in your thoughts, gradually replacing the negative messages that once occupied that space. God's promises are filled with reassurance. They remind you that you are not forgotten, that your life has purpose, and that your path is guided by a wisdom far greater than your own understanding. When these truths begin to fill your thinking, your mind becomes less vulnerable to the whispers of doubt that try to pull you away from peace. One of the reasons many people struggle with anxious thinking is because their mind is constantly trying to predict what will happen next. The future feels uncertain, and the mind attempts to analyze every possible outcome in order to feel prepared. But this constant analysis often leads to more worry rather than clarity. God's promises offer a different kind of certainty. Instead of promising that every situation will unfold exactly as you expect, they promise that God will remain faithful regardless of how circumstances change. This assurance allows your mind to release the pressure of predicting every detail of the future. When your thoughts align with this truth, your focus shifts from controlling outcomes to trusting God's guidance. You begin to realize that even when you cannot see the full path ahead, the one who guides that path sees it clearly. This awareness brings a deep sense of calm to the mind. Aligning your mind with God's promises also means allowing those promises to shape how you see yourself. Many people carry quiet doubts about their own worth or ability. These doubts often come from past experiences, from critical voices they once heard, or from comparisons with others. But God's promises speak directly to your identity. They remind you that you are created with intention, that your life holds meaning, and that God's love for you is not dependent on perfection. When you allow these truths to enter your thinking, they begin to replace the inner criticism that negative thoughts often create. Your mind begins to recognize that your value is not determined by temporary successes or failures. It is rooted in the love of the one who created you. This realization changes the way you approach challenges. Instead of feeling defined by every mistake, you begin to see each moment as an opportunity to grow with God's guidance. Another powerful aspect of aligning your mind with God's promises is the way it changes your emotional landscape. Emotions are often connected to the thoughts we repeat most frequently. When the mind constantly rehearses worries, the emotions that follow are often anxiety and tension. But when your thoughts repeatedly reflect God's promises, the emotions that arise are very different. Hope begins to replace worry. Gratitude begins to replace frustration. Confidence begins to replace uncertainty. This shift does not happen because circumstances suddenly become perfect, but because your perspective has changed. Your mind begins to interpret situations through the awareness that God is present and active in your life. Even challenges begin to appear differently. Instead of seeing them as threats, you may begin to see them as opportunities for growth, learning, or unexpected guidance. This alignment also strengthens your ability to remain calm when difficulties appear. Life will always include moments that test patience and faith. Unexpected events, delays, or disappointments may still occur. But when your mind is anchored in God's promises, those moments no longer have the power to shake your inner peace so easily. You may still feel concern, but that concern does not turn into overwhelming fear. You may still face questions, but those questions do not erase your confidence in God's presence. The promises you have allowed into your thinking become steady reminders that your life is held within a greater plan. One way to align your mind with God's promises is through intentional reflection. Take time during your day to remember the truths that God has spoken. This may happen through prayer, through reading scripture, or through quiet moments of meditation where you allow those promises to settle into your heart. As you reflect on these truths, imagine them becoming part of your thinking. Picture them replacing the negative thoughts that once filled your mind. Allow your heart to absorb their reassurance until they begin to feel natural within your thoughts. Another helpful practice is speaking God's promises aloud. When you hear your own voice declaring truth, your mind begins to absorb those words more deeply. Speaking them reminds your heart that these promises are not distant ideas, but living truths meant to guide your life. For example, you might remind yourself that God is guiding your steps, that His peace is guarding your heart, or that His wisdom is available for every decision you face. These declarations gradually reshape the environment of your thoughts. The more consistently you align your mind with God's promises, the more natural this process becomes. At first, it may require deliberate effort because your mind may be accustomed to focusing on worries or uncertainties. But over time, new patterns begin to form. Your thoughts begin to move toward faith more quickly. When challenges appear, your mind automatically remembers the promises that reassure you. Instead of spiraling into anxious thinking, you return more easily to the calm confidence that God is guiding your path. This transformation also influences how you interact with others. When your mind is filled with God's promises, your words often carry encouragement. You become someone who reminds others of hope, someone who speaks calmly even when situations feel uncertain. Your presence begins to reflect the peace that comes from trusting God's faithfulness. People may notice that you respond to difficulties with steadiness rather than panic. This quiet confidence becomes a testimony to the power of aligning your thoughts with divine truth. God's promises were never meant to remain distant words written on a page. They were meant to become living realities within the minds and hearts of those who trust Him. When you allow those promises to shape your thinking, your mind becomes a place where faith grows stronger each day. Your thoughts become more peaceful because they are anchored in something unchanging. Your heart becomes more resilient because it knows that God's guidance is constant. The noise of fear gradually fades as the clarity of divine truth becomes the foundation of your thinking. And slowly, gently, your mind begins to reflect the calm confidence that comes from trusting promises that never fail, promises that guide your thoughts toward peace. Promises that remind you that your life is held within the steady hands of a faithful God who continues shaping your journey with wisdom, love, and purpose in every moment you choose to align your thinking with His truth. Beloved, there is a powerful shift that happens when faith moves from silent belief into spoken declaration. Many people believe in God's peace in their hearts, yet they rarely speak that peace over their lives. But the words we speak carry influence. Words shape our perspective, guide our emotions, and reinforce the direction of our thoughts. When you begin declaring peace over your life, you are not simply speaking positive phrases. You are aligning your voice with the truth that God has already established. Life often presents moments where the mind becomes unsettled. Unexpected news may arrive. Plans may change and circumstances may feel uncertain. In those moments, the mind naturally searches for stability. Without guidance, it may drift toward worry or speculation. But declaration redirects that movement. When you intentionally speak peace, you remind your mind that God's presence is greater than the uncertainty surrounding you. Declaring peace is an act of faith because it chooses truth before circumstances fully reflect it. You may not always feel calm when you begin speaking peace over your life. Your thoughts may still be busy, and your heart may still be processing the situation in front of you. Yet declaration plants a seed of calm within your mind. It interrupts the cycle of anxious thinking and replaces it with a steady reminder that God is present and active in your life. There is something deeply transformative about hearing your own voice speak words of faith. Your mind listens to the words you speak. When your voice consistently expresses worry or fear, your thoughts begin to reinforce those emotions. But when your voice consistently declares peace and trust in God, your thoughts gradually begin to follow that direction. Consider how often people unintentionally declare the opposite of peace over their lives. They may say things like, "I can't handle this," or "everything is going wrong," or "I feel overwhelmed." While these expressions may feel honest in the moment, repeated statements like these can reinforce feelings of stress and helplessness. Over time, the mind begins to expect difficulty because it has heard those messages so often. Declaring peace changes that pattern. Instead of reinforcing the presence of problems, you begin reinforcing the presence of God. You remind yourself that your life is not defined by the pressure you feel, but by the peace that God provides. This shift in language slowly reshapes the atmosphere within your mind. When you declare peace, you are also reminding yourself of the authority that comes from your relationship with God. Scripture often speaks about the power of the tongue, describing how words can influence the direction of life. When your words align with God's promises, they carry spiritual significance. They become expressions of trust that invite God's peace to settle within your thoughts. Declaring peace does not require elaborate or complicated language. In fact, the most powerful declarations are often simple and sincere. A quiet statement such as, "God's peace is guiding my mind today," can carry profound influence when spoken with genuine faith. These words become anchors that steady your thinking during moments of uncertainty. You might begin your day with a declaration of peace. Before the responsibilities of the day begin, pause for a moment and remind your mind that God's presence is already with you. Speak calmly and intentionally, allowing your words to create a foundation of trust for the hours ahead. As the day unfolds, challenges may appear, responsibilities may feel heavy, and unexpected situations may demand your attention. In those moments, returning to your declaration of peace can help your mind remain steady. Instead of reacting immediately with worry, you pause and speak the truth you have chosen to believe. This practice gradually retrains the mind to respond differently to stress. Where there was once immediate tension, there begins to be a moment of calm reflection. Your mind learns that peace is available even before solutions fully appear. Declaring peace also helps you maintain perspective. When circumstances become overwhelming, it is easy for the mind to focus entirely on the difficulty in front of you. The problem begins to feel larger because it occupies so much of your attention. But when you speak peace over your life, your perspective widens. You remember that God's presence surrounds your situation. You remember that your life includes more than the challenge you are currently facing. Your mind begins to see the bigger picture, where faith and hope remain active even during difficult moments. Another beautiful aspect of declaring peace is the way it influences your emotions. Emotions are closely connected to the thoughts we repeat and the words we speak. When your declarations consistently emphasize peace and trust, your emotions begin to follow that direction. The tension in your body may begin to relax. Your breathing may become slower and steadier. Your heart may begin to feel lighter because the words you speak are guiding your attention toward calm rather than fear. Declaring peace is not about denying that challenges exist. It is about acknowledging that those challenges do not have ultimate authority over your life. God's peace stands above every circumstance. When you speak that truth, you are reminding your mind of the greater reality that surrounds your situation. This practice also strengthens resilience. Life inevitably includes moments when plans do not unfold as expected. There may be seasons of waiting, uncertainty, or disappointment. In those seasons, declarations of peace become powerful reminders that your journey is still guided by God's wisdom. Instead of allowing frustration to dominate your thinking, you continue speaking calm trust over your life. You remind yourself that even delays and detours can become part of a larger purpose that God is shaping. Over time, these declarations create a stable foundation within your mind. Peace becomes something you carry with you rather than something you search for only when problems arise. Your inner world becomes less reactive and more steady because it is anchored in the truth you consistently speak. Declaring peace also affects the way others experience your presence. When your words carry calm confidence, the people around you often feel that steadiness as well. Your conversations become less centered on worry and more centered on hope and encouragement. In this way, your declarations influence not only your own thoughts, but also the atmosphere of the environments you enter. Peace becomes something that radiates outward from your life, touching the hearts of those who listen to your words. Children, friends, co-workers, and family members may notice that you respond to situations with calm rather than panic. They may observe the steady way you speak about challenges. Even without realizing it, your declarations may inspire them to seek a similar peace in their own lives. Another important aspect of declaring peace is consistency. The mind learns through repetition. A single declaration can bring momentary comfort, but repeated declarations gradually reshape the patterns of your thinking. Each time you speak peace, you are reinforcing the pathway that leads your mind back to trust in God. Over days and weeks, that pathway becomes easier for your thoughts to follow. Peace becomes more natural because your mind has practiced returning to it again and again. There may still be moments when anxiety tries to return. Old habits of thinking sometimes attempt to reappear, especially during stressful situations. But the declarations you have practiced become tools you can use immediately. They remind your mind of the truth you have chosen to believe. When you speak peace in those moments, it is like lighting a gentle lamp in a dark room. The darkness may have been present for a while, but the moment light appears, the atmosphere changes. In the same way, your declaration begins to illuminate your thinking with faith. God's peace was never meant to remain distant from your daily life. It was meant to guide your thoughts, influence your words, and shape the atmosphere of your heart. Declaring that peace allows you to participate actively in welcoming it into your life. Each word of faith becomes a reminder that God's presence is constant. Each declaration becomes a step toward greater calm within your mind. Over time, the voice of peace grows stronger than the voice of fear. Your thoughts begin to rest more easily. Your heart becomes steadier. Your perspective remains anchored in trust even when circumstances change. And slowly, gently, the practice of declaring peace becomes a natural rhythm within your life, where every word spoken in faith invites the quiet strength of God's presence to settle deeper into your thoughts, and every declaration becomes another reminder that His peace is guiding your life with calm authority beyond every worry that once tried to disturb the stillness of your mind. Beloved, walking daily in God's calm and confidence is not a single moment of spiritual victory. It is a rhythm of life that grows stronger with practice. Many people experience peace during prayer or during a quiet spiritual moment, but then they return to the pressures of everyday life and that peace slowly fades. Yet God never intended His peace to be limited to a few quiet minutes of the day. His desire is that His calm presence would accompany you through every hour, every decision, every conversation, and every responsibility you carry. Life is filled with movement. The day begins with responsibilities calling for your attention. There may be messages to answer, tasks to complete, people to support, and challenges to solve. The pace of life can feel fast, and the mind can easily become pulled in many directions at once. In that movement, it becomes easy to forget the calm you felt when you first connected with God's presence.